Hello, my name is Hakon and welcome back to my channel and another little tutorial on the Empress Effects Zoia modular patchable synthesizer in a little box with a grid interface and where the only limitation is your imagination and the CPU, of course. Right, so I just made a tutorial where I demonstrated this. This is a button, I push it, and it changes color and it sends out potentially different values into the world of Zoia where it can do different things. The idea is it's like a multi-switch on one button that gives you visual feedback of which setting is active. And the way I did that in my previous tutorial, which I will link to up here if you are interested in watching it, is I'm sending the output of the UI button to the gate input of the sequencer. And that means every time I push the button, the sequencer will advance one step, and the output of the sequencer is sent to the channel selector of the switch, and it has values that will select the specific different channels of the switch, and whatever channel on the switch is active will send out a value of 1, which is sent back to the UI button with different connection strengths to change the color, and also those are the values that are sent out into the rest of the patch to control whatever the button is for. Simple, right? Now, it turns out there might actually be a much simpler way to do this. On the Facebook forum, when I posted the link to the video, somebody had trouble getting the colors right on the button. It turns out he had patched the output of the sequencer into the button. And that gave me a very good idea for how to do this in potentially a simpler way as well. And I think, I'm not 100% sure now, it may actually be more CPU friendly. I haven't double checked that yet. But in any case, it is more flexible. So I'm going to do that from scratch now and talk you through how we do this. So first of all, we want a UI button. I'll just put that there on the edge there. So actually I'll put it there. So we have interface modules, UI button, and we want to go down to CV output enabled, because we want this to have not just an input with a changing color, we want it to have an output and function as a button or a switch as well. So done. Now it is without any color at all, because a UI button only lights up, the main pad of it only lights up if it gets a CV value on itself or sent to it. And the output lights up brightly every time you push it, because that sends out a value of 1. So, and then we need a sequencer. So control modules, sequencer, and I'm going to do 3 steps today as well. But I'm going to make 2 tracks on this sequencer instead of 1. And that is because I want this sequencer to control both the output of the switch, so that is the value that the switch is sending out into the rest of the patch, and I want to control the color of the switch as well from the sequencer, and I can use track 2 for that. So first things first, we go to output 1 of the switch here, and that is set to CV, but output 2 is by default set to gate. So I'm going to push my encoder until it says CV. So now both tracks on the sequencer sending out CV. The output from the UI switch here, I will patch into the gate input of the sequencer, like so. And I want track 2 of the sequencer to define the color of the UI button, so I'm patching that into the UI button main pad there. And then every time I push the UI button now, which is still invisible, the sequencer advances 1 step. So far, so good. Now to set the values of the colors here. So now I've set it to step 1. And on step 1, I want the UI button to be red. So instead of adjusting connection strength like I had to do in my previous version of this, what I can do here is to adjust the value here. You can see it, now I can preview the values as well. You can see how it cycles through. Now I want a value of 0.0375 for bright red, so that is going to be there. So for the first button step, we want 0.0375. And then I'm going to push the button and we advance to the next step, and I'm going to set the value there. And let's make it, let's see, what do we get to? Orange there. What is bright orange? I'll just move it now until it goes dark, and then I'll move it back a little bit. 875, it looks like, is the right value. And then we advance it to the third step and we adjust that in the sequencer now. So red, orange, and then it's mango, I suppose. Let's see, and we are getting to 1375 presumably. I haven't looked up the table today. There we are. Yeah, 1375. So now we have set the values that are sent on track 2 here. So now when I push the UI button, it changes color between red, orange, and mango. Not a huge contrast. I would have liked a better contrast normally for a button like this, but just as an example of how to adjust these values by eye as well. And then on track 1 now of our sequencer, these are the values we can then send out into the rest of the patch to do whatever they are supposed to do. I don't know what they're supposed to be now. They could be absolutely anything and do anything. And the good thing about this way of doing it as well is that in addition to it being easier to set the colors of the buttons, you also don't have to convert the values sent out from the switch. Now, the easiest way to do a switch, on a switch, you have the same value coming in for all the different, well, at least to start with, to all the different channels from one input. Here, you already have 3 different values if you want to. So you could set these to absolutely anything, and you don't have to do any conversion from the switch with connection strength or via multiplier modules or whatever else you want to do. And another good thing is that also makes it easier to change these values dynamically. That is to say, you have things that alter the values you want sent out from this button, from this switch button here. And whatever modifying values you want for each of these steps, you patch those into the steps on the sequencer. If you have a multi-track sequencer, the first track, track number 1, is modifiable from the outside. So when you patch something into these pads on the sequencer, it changes track 1 values. It adds to the value set in the sequencer itself. Track 2 is not affected, so it doesn't change the color of the button. If you also want to change both the values that are sent out from this switch and you want to dynamically change the colors of the switch when something changes in your patch, that is a possibility. You could have a second sequencer that controls the color. So you have one sequencer controlling the values that are sent out, and you have another sequencer that controls the color that is on the button at different stages. This allows you, for instance, just a complete hypothetical now, but just think of it like this. You could have a button that does, now I have a button that does 3 different things. You could, of course, cycle through more than 3. But imagine if you want to be very efficient in your user interface design, you could, for instance, have another button next to it that cycles through 3 different sets of buttons on this one here, so that together those 2 buttons could be 9 different options. And then you could actually have the first button, as it cycles through those 3 different other ones, the colors that are on this button will change. Just for instance, hope I didn't confuse you with that, but that allows you to have 9 different options on 2 buttons that are just a few key presses away at all times, for instance. Or more. You can have more than 3, obviously. Another thing about UI buttons, and of course I have mentioned this before now, so you see when it lights up here on the output on your UI page, your user interface page, normally this pad doesn't do anything once it has been patched up to the gate. So you want to hide that, and by putting some other module on top of it. So I would normally, on a page like this, if this was my whole interface now, I would move this to the edge, and so the output of this button is now underneath the sequencer and it doesn't show. So you can only see the button itself and you can see the color changing. So I would do that on my user interface page and make sure that the outputs are, well, it's nice and neat, and you have a row here, for instance, of different switches or buttons doing different things. So that's just a little update on my previous one, and I think this actually uses less CPU as well. I thought first of all it used more, but that's because I remembered it wrong. The other one I think was hovering now on 2.6 or 2.7%. This one is at 2.4%. This is both the most CPU efficient way of doing it and also the most flexible. Win-win. There you go. So I hope you found this little tutorial useful, interesting, or inspirational, or whatever else. So I'll see you in my next one. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye for now. Bye-bye.